Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Whole wall thing, dude.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real.
Non-human, exotic origin, vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
Are there people in Congress that do not want this information out there?
I mean, we can only interpret what sources are alleging, and we can read into it and speculate ourselves when it comes to that. There is no compelling evidence to state. There's no compelling evidence to state 100% that people don't want the truth. That would probably persuade everyone. I would say that it was pretty clear, in my opinion, that Representative Mike Turner was against disclosure. And I think that is the same as well with the ranking Democratic member of the House Intelligence Committee, who I believe is still there. It wasn't always like that, remember it was the Intelligence Committee within the House that kind of got the first hearing underway. I think it was like 3 years back now, when it was under a different chair, under the Democrats, and things were a lot different then. Now we've got a situation whereby this topic seems to resonate mainly with the House Oversight Committee, which is where we're getting the hearings at the moment. And obviously they lack the clearances and the muscle power that the Intel and Armed Services Committees have in terms of getting the National Defense Authorization Act language passed, and having that influence as well, I guess. So, and look, it's been alleged as well, I think by Matthew Brown, that there was some interference happening as well at the November hearing held by the I think it was the subcommittee of the Oversight Committee, and it does seem that there was something going on. I mean, I was in contact with Jeremy at the time, and I could tell that he was very, very stressed. I think, going from my own belief, without definitively being able to prove it, I think there was interference, most definitely. I believe believe is a key word, that that Jeremy, that the fact that Jeremy's page did not turn up in the congressional record when that Immaculate Constellation document was put in there, I think that was purposely and deliberately done. I think that it had been decided that they didn't want to give Jeremy any credit, but it was more than credit, I believe. In my own interpretation of it, I don't think Jeremy was kind of like mad because it was an ego thing or anything like that. I think that in my mind, I'd say that if you're willing to kind of like make a small lie saying that it was Michael Schellenberger who did it and not correct the record, and take out that page as well and pretend it didn't exist. If you're willing to do that, then how can a whistleblower who is like fearing for their life, potentially, able to go up to you and trust you if you're willing to do that? So I think that's my takeaway from it. And look, I think also when you're accounting for this as well, I mean, I think too many people give intelligence services the benefit of the doubt and pretend, that whatever's there on the official record or the official kind of like stories reported by the New York Times and stuff on CIA, that's what they do, or what they put out through their own records and stuff like that. But look, I believe there is a shadowy side to these intelligence services, and I think that I'm definitely of the belief that there could potentially be a situation whereby certain members of important committees are potentially at risk. Maybe the intelligence services have something on them, and are able to kind of like allow them to do their bit, or make them do their bidding because they know that they have damaging information on them, being the intelligence services. So I think that situation and that dynamic may exist as well. It's a shadowy world, a really, really shadowy world, I believe. And like George Knapp says, that they're just much better at doing their jobs than we'll ever be at doing ours. And I subscribe to that as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But we've had a lot of traction recently. We did have a timeline a few weeks ago posted on X by Annapoleon and Luna of things that were upcoming. Now, one of them didn't happen, which was the hearing that was meant to take place, or was going to take place, I don't know, around 12th of May, that sort of week. But we did finally get David Grush in a skiff. Could you clear up about why it's taken so long, and anything you know about the kind of information or the meeting itself?
I don't have insight into that meeting. I think George Knapp has mentioned that kind of like Dave was like kicking ass in terms of some of the UFO insiders. But I think what it is that I think there's been a lack of focus in terms of what the Oversight Committee and the task force that Luna is leading is actually doing. They're trying to take on too much at once, in my opinion. And I think they should just focus on one thing at a time. And I think there was momentum after the Dave Grush hearing, the public hearing, which is about 2 years ago now. And sadly, that wasn't followed up. And then you had some more potential momentum after November's hearing. Again, it wasn't followed up. And there's no clear action about what they're actually going to do. And I would just say that I think there's some inexperience within that committee in terms of how to get things done. And there does seem a lack of coordination, a lack of organisation to some extent. I don't think that's because people necessarily want to scupper things, but I just think it's just a lack of experience, especially when it comes to handling sensitive information, which is usually dealt with by armed services and intel committees. So I suspect that's to blame for a lot of the lack of traction we've been getting as of late, and this is why potentially we didn't get this hearing that we were promised. I think it was supposed to take place last week. So that's my own reading of it. So yeah, I think we're just in a situation right now whereby we can do things the way that we always have done for the last few years. Try to get language within the Intelligence Authorization Act and National Defence Authorization Act, get it passed, but then someone could scupper it at the last moment. It could be we don't know where the acting chair of the Intelligence Committee, where does he stand on UAP at the moment? Is he going to be the same as Turner? This is Representative Crawford now. I was trying to get in touch with his staff. They wouldn't answer me. They didn't want to talk about it. So that doesn't give me great confidence. Or, we know for a fact, that there are links there are connections between disclosure advocates, notably Lou Elizondo, and this is public information, and members of the Trump administration. He has a good relationship with Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, and he's even appeared on Donald Trump's son's podcast, Donald Trump Jr.'s podcast, I think 2 times now. So there are some direct connections now, and Rubio is a big advocate of this topic as well. He's there acting head of NARA at the moment, I believe, and also the temporary kind of national security advisor as well. And if Immaculate Constellation really is a program from the National Security Council, then Rubio is in the perfect position to find out now, by the way. But it feels like that we're in a situation that we weren't in under the Biden administration now. We've got advocates with direct access to the White House, and you'd think that's just a shortcut to get around all these kind of like hurdles. Potentially, you could kind of like basically tear your legislation apart and hollow it out, which has been done before with the UAPDA. So you would hope now we're in a situation whereby those connections with the White House could really give us traction. That's my read on it at the moment. Sorry, I kind of like went away from your question a little bit then. Digress.
No, that's totally fine. I mean, I was going to ask, one of the questions I was going to ask is, where is the executive branch? We haven't heard that much yet. I think early on in Donald Trump's term at the start of the year, he was signing executive orders to release some files to the task force. So, could it be that we get eventually an executive order signed to release UFO files? Is that in, something that maybe in plans?
Yeah, I think it's kind of I think you would have to go a lot further than just releasing files in terms of UFOs, because I think wherever there's a will, there's a way to kind of like hide files and make sure that the important stuff is squirreled away. I think it's got to be a lot more than that. I think the UAPDA is the way to go, and you need cooperation from the Department of Energy on this, and you need a real active investigation within these places. You need to get people subpoenaed within the CIA, within the National Reconnaissance Office, with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. You need the people who are the gatekeepers. You need to get them into Congress or into the White House, and they have some explaining to do. Basically, you need. I think that's what needs to happen. You need an active investigation. Really, you need someone to knock down doors to find out what is happening. And look, the pushback is real as well. I believe at the moment it feels to me that there is a lot of pushback, and it is being coordinated by the intelligence community and its long arms. And I believe that needs investigating as well, because it's not right.
No, it's not. I mean, it seems like there's a lot happening behind the scenes. There's skiff meetings, there's people trying to rally together to get hearings from happening. But in a recent, or I think in the latest episode of the Weaponized podcast, Jeremy Corbell seemed to be very positive when he stated that he seems to think there'll be new whistleblowers coming forward in a public setting, people that have either touched the craft who are from the inside, something along those lines. Have any of your sources given you anything along those lines?
In terms of the craft and going inside?
Of new whistleblowers. Jeremy seems to have been speaking with people.
Yeah. I did get the impression that new whistleblowers are ready to go forward. And I think Matthew Brown really just showed the way to go forward, because you've got to get out there. You've got to put yourself on camera, make yourself publicly known, and that's a form of protection. So it helps protect them when they actually can go in front of the camera and tell them what they know. Because if you're just an unknown person, that puts you more at risk in a way as well. And I think I think people look at certain things and they think that could happen to me. A prime example potentially is, although it's not been proven, I think a lot of people got the jitters early in January when that former Green Beret kind of like blew himself up within a Tesla vehicle, and then out came this manifesto that these these drones are actually using exotic propulsion and they're Chinese, and basically it's game over, and it's the Americans and the Chinese who have this technology. I think when that happened, people got the jitters, and they're like, okay, so if this guy was fearing for his life, and obviously, he's turned up dead, okay, was that an assassination? It certainly looks like it could be. Gosh, I better come out there now. I need to get in front of the camera. So I think there's part of that, but also, there is still some hesitation. I know of one person who was, warned. It was a friendly warning from another UAP advocate, basically saying, just make sure you don't go too far in terms of what you say. Don't ride your luck too much, what you say publicly. So there's always kind of like, when you're doing an interview and stuff like that, there's always kind of like, okay, did I say too much? Have I gone over that line? And that's the difficulty as well. And I think that a lot of these people, especially whistleblowers who are not military or intelligence, just like basically engineers and scientists who've been working on this, they're the ones who kind of like, they're quite fearful. They didn't get into this stuff to, be threatened. And that's really, really sad that they do feel that way.
No, it really is. I mean, Matthew Brown seemed to give the right amount of information without going too far. I'm not too sure on that, but he talked enough that it seemed that he'd done a thorough enough investigation into Immaculate Constellation and other areas, because there was instantly that pushback saying that, well, he's just mistaken war games scenarios for a real UAP program. So now Jeremy's come out saying no Immaculate Constellation, and then there's 9 other UAP programs in the Legacy program. What are your thoughts on that?
I tend to, firstly, I have no reason to doubt that, it is a USAP. Look, until I can get something compelling proving otherwise, then, it's contested. And, I think that, Jeremy and Matthew put, and George have put, something compelling forward. That makes me believe it. It is a USAP. I've asked Susan Goff, saying, "Look, have you investigated this? Was it war games?" Because it should be quite easy for the Pentagon just to say, "Look, this guy got mistaken. We know what file it is. It's a joke, or it's war games." It'd be very, very easy to brush aside, one would think, if it is something like that. And I think the key to this is the videos. If he is seeing those videos, which I believe he was, of these triangular objects by these Russian intelligence vessels, and I believe another one belonged to another nation as well, from the document that he gave. I believe that's quite compelling. And that's the stuff, if even if it did come out that, this is to do with war games and stuff like that, still doesn't explain the videos and the information given, unless it's some elaborate kind of like prank or hoax or something like that. And if it was, should be easy enough to say, look, this is all a prank or hoax. The DoD could come out and say that tomorrow, but it does seem to me, the fact they're being so quiet about it, that there is some sensitive information there that they don't want to fess up to. It's important as well in terms of the Immaculate Constellation document, as we refer to. It's more kind of a holistic than that. It's about the investigations that Matthew started after he had actually been exposed to that file, and equally, I think what he found seems to have been quite compelling as well. This this saucer shape in the clouds, kind of like acting playfully. That rings a few bells. This is being described by countless witnesses that these things seem to be playful. I think that's really, really interesting as well. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more to Matthew Brown and his allegations than Immaculate Constellation. And yeah, I think there's, even if, let's say, it did turn out to be war games or something like that, which I don't believe, but even if it was that, the videos, that's what people should really focus on.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. What about the number of legacy programs within the legacy program that Jeremy mentioned, saying that there's 9? Have any of your sources indicated any numbers to you?
I don't know how easy it would be to kind of like track all the legacy programs. I mean, what you're looking at really, let's look, for instance, at the retrieval kind of like operations behind UAP. So yes, retrieval operations exist, to retrieve Russian satellites, Korean rockets, Chinese aircraft that have been downed, stuff like that. But within that, which is already kind of like quite secretive in terms of what they're actually doing. Within that secrecy, you've got another layer of secrecy as well, which is the UAP stuff. So you do have whistleblowers saying, look, I'm used to these missions. We were retrieving normal stuff, and then one day we happened to encounter an egg or something like that. We've had one person come out and saying that, and I think that's really, really interesting. When you get to those really, really bizarre kind of objects that they are actually seeing, and they have, from my understanding, been exposed to biologics as well, non-human biologics as part of those craft. And look, I will say as well that if you're based in North Carolina at the place where the 24th Special Tactics Squadron is based, and you're a mechanic, for instance, which one whistleblower was, I think that's really, really interesting. And I've written before in my Office of Global Access story that these missions are undertaken between components of JSOC, which includes the Special Tactics Squadron, and CIA's Directorate of Operations and its units within that. So this is kind of like this is where it comes into Title 50, Title 10, when they're operating these missions and flipping between the two. So that's what is really, really interesting to take into account as well. You have that aspect as well. And I think that it becomes so complex in terms of the web of secrecy. It's really, really difficult to kind of like put a definitive number on how many legacy programs there are. And, would you even count kind of a UAP retrieval mission as a legacy program? We're talking about like actual programs, and then sometimes they happen to come across something really, really bizarre. I'm not saying there's no protocol or something like that, but it's kind of like a mission within a program, and then obviously you've got your technology stuff as well to do with that in terms of reverse engineering and replicating the craft, and that's a whole kind of like different subdivision. But then again, it's been said that there's countless kind of like aerospace companies, operating these kind of like programs, and reverse engineering them and stuff. Like it's such a complex web, from my understanding. But look, I'm not sure what Jeremy has been exposed to, but again, I trust Jeremy. And I'd also like to say as well that, Jeremy, George, UAP Disclosure Fund, have been doing a fantastic job. And in terms of Jeremy, let's not forget that, the David Grush hearing that happened, he played a really, really large role in that. He played a huge role in making the November hearing happen as well, and he's still doing his part behind the scenes. He's like a one-man machine, and I think that he doesn't get enough kind of he doesn't get enough credit sometimes for the fantastic work he is doing with members of Congress. But yeah, he's doing a really, really excellent job. And what else was I going to mention? Sorry, it's just escaped my mind what else I was going to say. But no, for now I'll just say all credit to Jeremy about from what he's been pulling off there in Congress.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. We mentioned in there David Grush, and earlier we talked about him in this SCIF briefing, and that was with Arrow, and I assume it was John Kozlowski, the current director. Now, Arrow in the past have stated through Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick that they were not aware of any crash retrieval or reverse engineering programs. But surely with David Grush, and by the sounds of it, he did divulge a reasonably large amount of information in that skiff briefing. Do you think Arrow may now have enough to start looking into this kind of thing? Or do you think they even would, even if they were given that kind of information?
I believe that Arrow is basically a lost cause because it was set up by the very office that that persecuted Louis Elizondo, and when it was under the name of AOIMSG, it was basically rebranded to Arrow. They had basically already set the organization up for failure, and they appointed the people they wanted to, who they could trust to kind of get the job done, in basically poo-pooing UAP. And if it is correct as well, Glenn Gaffney was one of the advisors to Kirkpatrick. So it looks to me like it's rotten to the core. It doesn't matter who you put as director at this point. It's a rotten organization. The one way to save it, I would say, was to, put it within the National Security. Well, basically what you would do is you'd get someone within the National Security Council, like a Lou or a Dave or someone like that, or a Carl, and you would basically give them direct oversight of the Arrow. So they're taking orders from someone who's like a firm advocate. That would be one way to save it. But, I think maybe what was happening was the Arrow was basically trying to get the same lines it has before, but then maybe Dave was pointing out the awkward truth about what they had not told Congress, and I think that must have happened. And Dave knows his stuff better than anyone when it comes to kind of like SAPs and caps and clearances and the way that you would hide this, and it's and all the nuances and stuff like that. So if there's anyone who's going to basically show Arrow up, it's Dave.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, early on in Arrow's days, we had Senator Gillibrand, who held a couple of public hearings and probably some private ones as well, trying to keep them in line, ask them what they've been doing, everything. So where is the Senate? A lot of the Senates have kind of gone quiet. And we mentioned earlier the Armed Services Committee and the Intel Committee. Do you think we'll ever get hearings from that side of the political aisle, or that side of Congress?
Yeah, I think you could have like another hearing that you've had, like similar to the one that you had before, with Gillibrand questioning Kozlowski about how the Arrow is doing, what's been your findings so far, do you need any help, that kind of stuff. It seems to me that they don't want to go too far into the bushes when it comes to this. They want to push the boat out too far, which I guess is a problem as well. I think a lot of like mainstream or news organizations and like big senators, they're too afraid to really push the boat too much. Look at the 60 Minutes episode the other day, for instance. A month ago. They were using. I introduced them to Jonathan Butner, who was one of the witnesses who saw the craft over Langley, and they're saying what he saw and painting as drones and stuff like that. But as much as I think it could be drones, definitely, they're not really taking into account what Jonathan actually had to say, because Jonathan was explaining them as kind of like sources, what he was saying, that were flying across. So it's kind of like you can't. It's too much of like they're just trying to get away from the weird stuff. But sometimes you can't hide behind it. You've got to take into account what the witnesses are saying. You can't hide behind it. Look what Eric Davis recently just said at this UAPD PDF event, UAP Disclosure Fund, about the species. And inevitably, if you do believe that UAP, some of them do come from a non-human intelligence, you can't just hide behind that. Someday you're going to have to speak about who the occupants are. So I think some people have to take risks, but also at the same time, when you are kind of like talking about things like this, you have to be precise. So, okay, so if you name species that you're aware of, how do you know that information? How do you know that? Where are they stored in? What kind of like department of the US government or what corporation are overseeing it? The specifics are needed now, I think, and that makes it more credible and grounded in terms of the allegations that you do get, which is why when I do articles, I try to be really, really specific as much as I can in terms of who's controlling this stuff, who's got the key roles and stuff like that. So that's really, really important. I feel that a good approach for the Senate to take, if it does want to dive deeper into these waters, is to be specific, be forensic, in terms of gathering who's involved and how these things work. So yeah, I really do hope it changes. I've heard that Senator Tom Cotton, the new Intel chair, that he is someone who is not friendly towards disclosure. It's been reported that he opposed Amaryllis Kennedy from being the deputy CIA director, and that was reported back in November, I believe. And I believe that may have had something to do with her being someone who was anti-CIA and potentially following up on her. I believe that it could be them fearing that she was going to follow up on JFK's wish to tear the agency apart. But there could be a UAP component there as well. I've been told that Amaris is an advocate for UAP. So yeah, and if that is true, what does that tell you about Senator Tom Cotton? Obviously, he's denied it, but we're talking about a politician here.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. You mentioned then the CIA, and I guess it's getting the right people in the right jobs in these intel organizations to kind of gain some traction and momentum. But I think one positive that we heard recently was that there was this briefing between the members of the UAP caucus and the FBI. Do you have any information on that kind of connection and relationship?
I don't think always what it seems between the UAP topic and the FBI is you might believe. I think there may be, and I'm looking into this right now, I think there may be substance that it is playing a negative role in terms of the UAP topic. But, it could also be playing both sides. So from what I've heard, it's not all positive. I believe it's been made pretty clear to some people who are advocates for the topic that their communications are being monitored. I'll leave it at that. And people are like, Chris, gosh, I'm talking to you, so I bet my phone's being monitored. I'm like, probably.
Now, we recently also found out that Japan have a UAP parliamentary group who are kind of, I don't know if they're starting a kind of Japanese version of Arrow or they have started one, but are you hearing anything from any other countries at all?
It's gone silent for the most part. I think there was some activity within the House of Lords. I think some evidence has been submitted to one of the committees, I believe, in terms of what they're doing in terms of space at the moment, in terms of studying the potential of space, UK activities in space. I believe that there's been something submitted recently in relation to UAP and studying it, but I mean, it's nothing as big as what the US has, and I believe that the UK really should be getting on this. And I think, in terms of what we're doing in the UK and what other European nations are doing as well, is just not enough, because unfortunately, you do have a territory where UAP could mean anything. It could mean Russian activity, it could mean Chinese activity. And unless you really get on the front foot in terms of identifying and resolving cases, you have no idea what's in your skies, and you don't have domain awareness. And I think that was perfectly clear from the events that took place in November and December that the UK doesn't have domain awareness, and they should be starting activity again and putting that UAP office back together again that it used to have, in order to actively investigate cases. It was told to me, it's a good story actually, that I was aware that the UAP, well, the drone activity, as we put it, was a lot more substantial in the UK, that we've been led to believe that there were incidents at Portsmouth Naval Base, in Hampshire, as well as Aldermaston as well, which is where AWE is based, which is like the weapons factory, the nuclear weapons place, which is near where I live. And I'd heard about that, and it was quite interesting because I'm from Reading, originally, and I got friends who live around that area. And I did a call out on my Facebook, I think, saying that, has anyone in the area seen anything, like any drones or UAP activity in the area? And no one actually got back to me. And then I met two of my friends at the weekend, and one of them actually was, is originally from Aldermaston, and was staying with one of her family members there. And when my friend saw my Facebook post, they immediately looked out the window and saw like a drone buzzing above the area. And I was like, gosh, why didn't you say that to me? And they said, oh no, it didn't look like a UFO or anything. And I was like, well, that's the point. A lot of these things are actually potentially drones from Russia. I just don't think, that the MOD has a very good system in terms of nullifying these threats. And that's the same with the US as well. We've had this plant, I think it's Plant 42, the place in America, in California, that's got the Lockheed Skunk Works. I found, or my friend Kyle found the logs from those incidents when you had these incursions, and it was just kind of like they sent a helicopter after it, a sheriff's helicopter, and they still couldn't find it. And I think they got so kind of like frustrated, they raced after it to find out where they were coming from, like a Jeep or something like that, just to like find out where they were coming from. And he still failed, and that's really, really interesting because, when we were getting all these like weird reports and we weren't seeing any videos or anything back in August when those events occurred, and it was in Palmdale, and immediately when these stories came out, we had like a weird message on Google, about like, there are all these reports, these are on verified sources, untrusted sources. Like, that's really weird. You're just getting some random chatter on the web, and it seems quite disproportionate that Google would send out these messages. Well, look, there was something there, and I think you could define them as UFOs, UAP, because it wasn't really clear how they were able to operate as they were operating, and there was nothing mentioned in the logs about countermeasures. But it's hard to believe that there weren't countermeasures at that base, and it seems like all the other bases where these things have been occurring, that countermeasures failed to bring these things down, which is really alarming. And going back to Japan, it's very, very important that it can actually set up a kind of UAP operation, because you do have potential kind of like Chinese surveillance activity as well. I remember a few years ago, there was like UFO reports in Japan, and you looked at the actual footage out there, and it looks exactly like the Chinese surveillance balloon that was entering the US a few years ago. It's like, yeah, they really need to get on top of this. But yeah, I think more countries really do need to get onto the UAP beat to see what's going on there. But obviously, you've got this prosaic kind of like explanation, and then you've got the exceptional cases, which are really just like bizarre and unexplainable. But I think it's really, really a priority to kind of like investigate both.
Yeah, I do. And I mean, we had the Chinese spy balloon incident a few years ago with the other objects that kind of came down at that time that we never learned anything about. Here we are, 6+ months after this drone debacle, and it just seems to have gone the same way. I think people are just waiting for it for everyone to start looking at something else and just let it be forgotten, which is frustrating. But let me stick with the UK here, because I got sent a question from former CIA officer John Ramirez, And he wanted to ask, the British government's response to the UAP issue has been, there's nothing to see here. Kindly move along. What would need to happen for Her Majesty's government to initiate an investigation by the Commons, the Lords, or Number 10 on the order of the US Congress?
Well, firstly, you have to have a Secretary of State that's in control of their own department. And sadly, that's not the case. And I think the US has a similar issue there. It's like it's been explained by Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's former advisor, as a kayfabe. They strut into these Downing Street meetings like they're the boss, and they go into these interviews and they always say it's my department, or it's MOD or it's the Home Office. But then they go into the meetings and basically they're being told by civil servants what to actually say, and they don't. You have, let's take the MOD for instance, Ministry of Defence. So in essence, you have your Secretary of State, then you have like 3 or 4 ministers underneath that. Okay, so they're the only people that you've actually got, and you're supposed to be controlling a department with like thousands of people, or who know a lot more than you, or who have a lot more responsibility than you. You can only sack one person within your department. That's the only authority you actually have in terms to actually implement any change. It's just all the power rests with the actual kind of non-elected bureaucrats who are controlling these places. So firstly, I think that what you need to do is you need to reform government in order to actually provide members of parliament with more control over these departments. That's step number one. I think I think the best way to actually go about the investigation is the way that the Church Committee actually works. I think you need to actually have subpoena power. You need to get in contact with the head of MI6, the head of military intelligence, and various heads of the armed forces, whether it be the Royal Navy, in the Army and the Air Force. You need to kind of get them on record in terms of UAP incidents, what they've learned and whatnot. But and I'd be interested as well to know the dynamic of the retrieval missions as well, because we published that Frank Milburn piece about one of his colleagues. It seemed to be part of a retrieval mission in terms of a crashed object, which seemed to have non-human intelligence on board. So it'd be interesting as well, just like following up on those incidents, and if you're a member of parliament and you do happen to be in a reformed system where you can actually investigate stuff, where you do have power over your own department, it'd be great to actually properly investigate those cases and, cooperate with some kind of, special kind of like committee that's been set up on this. There is interest from politicians in the UK, but it's, I don't think we're nearly there at the moment in terms of penetrating any deep state that there may be in the UK, unfortunately.
I completely agree, because it was common knowledge that DI-55 used to take care and investigate the UFO subject for decades in the UK, and then that stopped. But this still must be happening. There still must be information flowing somewhere within the halls of the Ministry of Defence somewhere, or within the military branches, but it just seems so separated, and the information segregated from getting to the right people. I imagine that even people in Parliament or in the Commons or the House of Lords, and how would they even begin to look for this information? It just seems we're so behind.
Yeah, we really, really are. And look, we're working on the assumption there that we've got a decades-old conspiracy, and we're talking about retrieval and reverse engineering in essence. And you need to have various mechanisms. You have to have the tracking technology, the sensor technology. You have to have someone in charge of that, tracking these things. Then you need to have a system to potentially bring them down if you think they're hostile. And then you need someone to go and retrieve them. And then you need to have an operation of, okay, who do these go to now? How do we transport this away? Then you have to have, contracts given to defense corporations to reverse engineer them and work with government potentially. So there's a whole kind of like infrastructure there that needs to exist, So where is that infrastructure in the UK? Where does that exist, to do that? So and how deep is that buried? And how much is that kind of like controlled by the US as opposed to the UK as well? From my understanding, in the Lakenheath incidents in November and December, I think there was a feeling that the US wasn't saying all they knew about these things that were flying around, and I think there was some frustration around that. And we mustn't forget in the UK that we're essentially powerless. If we fell out with Donald Trump tomorrow, they had a big spat, Keir Starmer offended him or something like that, we'd be in a really, really bad position. Our defense, our nuclear infrastructure are dependent on America, to kind of like function. It's a real sad situation. We found out that there's a lot of European countries with US manufactured aircraft, and every time they use it, you actually need permission to use it from the US. So it's kind of like the US has a lot of leverage in terms of European countries, and especially the UK as well, I'd say. So it's I think Timothy Good always used to say that the MOD is basically an extension of the American government. Could be right.
Yeah, that makes more sense than not, for sure. I've got a few questions here from people that sent some in. So following on from John Ramirez is there. We've got one here from Nick. He says, is there a valid reason the individuals responsible for keeping this hidden from us can't be named and shamed, or are they just not known?
Well, they have been named and shamed. Glenn Gaffney being one of them. Robert Cardillo being another of the persons who's basically within the directorate. Within the Office of Director of National Intelligence. He's another person. So from understanding how it worked with the blocking of the Code of Blue program, which was prospective special access program, that was basically like Glenn Gaffney led the charge against that. And his underlings, the people who were working with him, were kind of like very, very rude, let's say, and were felt to be very, very threatening to people within the Department of Homeland Security, and basically that, and Lockheed Martin as well, by the way, and that's basically what sunk it. But the person who officially had the authority to block it was Robert Cardillo from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So, if Glenn Gaffney decided to go on record to say, I had nothing to do with blocking this, there's no record to say I have blocked this, he's actually correct. Because officially it was Robert Cardillo, from my understanding. So that's how these things work, But yeah, I believe that there are more that need to be named and shamed, but it's not my place to go out there with a name. And also, every time you do name and shame someone, that person probably has a lot of power and can hurt you and your loved ones potentially. Again, like this intelligence world, it's murky. These are people who deal with assassinations, works as they call them. Running a superpower, doesn't mean that you're all good. Unfortunately, the dirty work needs to be done as well. These people in these intelligence agencies are the ones who do that. It was mentioned to me, by the way, I'd asked one question. So I asked one question one time. It was like, how do these people within the intelligence community react, when they see a craft, they see an alien body, and they learn about the immensity of the conspiracy theory? I was told they don't react because the agency hires psychopaths and sociopaths.
Wow, my goodness. That's crazy. I wanted to ask, we're talking there about Kona Blue. Imagine if Kona Blue had gone ahead and it, sat under DHS, and Bigelow got access to the craft, which I believe was what would have happened. Would we be in a better position even if that had have gone forward? Would Bigelow not still be holding this as proprietary technology for himself, like he has the ORSAP files?
That's a really, really good question. I mean, who knows? I mean, there's always, look, there's always like the fear, isn't there, that people are trying to get access to these things and they act as advocates, and then they go away to a defense contractor, and they then got leverage because they're advocating for this to kind of get access to the goods. And then they're quiet about it because they've got what they want, and then they make money off of it. There is always the fear of that happening. I mean, that I know Com Kelleher, I know George, and others involved with that. I don't think that there was any instance of that. I think more so it wasn't so much about making it public. It was basically that Lockheed Martin felt that there wasn't enough talent within the organization, and it was so restrictive you couldn't get the best talent in that organization in the first place to be cleared to see this technology, and it was so restrictive they weren't able to make much progress, and that's a huge kind of like national security risk to America, especially if China's got similar programs happening. So the aim was to actually open that up to a bigger field of talent, basically, to see if they could help kind of like reverse engineer some of this material. So from my understanding, that's what's happened. And I guess when you talk about virtues, I think that might, that might be really, really important. I don't know if it's more important than transparency and telling us like, the true extent of what nature is instead of hiding nature from us, and being truthful to the public, which is basically what was always envisioned with a democratic state where the people are in charge. I don't know, but the way they see it, I suppose, is kind of like this is a fundamental risk. One country could dominate the rest of the world if they found this technology first, and better America than any other country that could be hostile. So I don't know. It's a tough one, isn't it? Transparency versus security.
Yeah, really tough, really tough. Dale Bowen, sorry. Has Chris ever received inside information that has worried / concerned him about the program / phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is to like do with who we are as humans. What if something was found in the wreckage of the craft of a UAP craft that kind of like had some kind of like insight into humanity, into ourselves, and could help humanity kind of like reach its potential. It seems to me that the evidence that remote viewing psychic powers is kind of like growing, especially after the telepathy tapes and a lot of the Sean Ryan interviews as well with former CIA operatives. We've had that one remote viewer who found the craft in Zambia, and who was recognized by Jimmy Carter just doing this miraculous thing of knowing where it was. So, if every human was psychic and there was a way to kind of like unlock that power, I mean, that creates problems as well. And I didn't really think about that before. If everyone was like psychic, like what happens to privacy? How do you kind of like regulate that? So, that's an unintended problem that could come from disclosure. But yeah, a few things do potentially rattle me, but unless I can get good evidence and compelling testimony, it's difficult to really tell if it is essentially worth worrying about or not. So yeah, it's definitely a tough one.
Yeah, no, I understand that completely. Well, Chris, I want to mention an article that was released on the Liberation Times today, which was written by Condorman, and this is about UAP shapes and propulsion systems. I know obviously you didn't write it, but what can you tell us about the article?
So I can give you the background in terms of because I'm obviously not an engineer. I don't want to get all technical and get it wrong. But the basis is that Condorman has been working behind the scenes with people that who are experts in the field, and kind of like trying to piece together about the relationship between the shapes and the capability of UAP and the propulsion, how they might work, and speculating on that, informed speculation, let's say. So yeah, I always find Condorman's articles just so interesting, just coming at the topic from a different angle. I'm really, really quite picky when it comes to writers. I mean, I get so many emails a day, just like with people who want to write articles. So you have to be like really, really selective. And for me, it's kind of like my blind spots. So I'm not a science person. I'm not an engineering person. I can look into the political aspect. That's fine. I can piece things together through investigation of who's who and who was involved. But when it comes to kind of like more nuts and bolts kind of like stuff, I think I want people who know what they're talking about, kind of like writing for me on that, and that's what Condorman, really brings to the table, I feel. So yeah, it's a great article, and it's always fantastic reading his stuff.
It really is. I found it so fascinating the way he describes certain shapes and the propulsion systems. I urge everybody listening or watching to go and check it out. Obviously, there are going to be links for all of Chris's stuff in the description of this interview. But Chris, before I let you go, anything you're working on at the moment that you can give us any hints on?
I think right now it's just piecing together where we are in the disclosure movement. I would say that the fact that we're in this position in the first place, that UAP hearings has become normalized. If you'd said that to people like 3 or 4 years ago, it'd be like, "What? No, would never happen." But now we're in that position, which is fantastic. And I think hopefully we could be on the brink of potential a breakthrough in terms of the White House, but we don't know that, and sadly we've been let down. I think there was kind of like some expectation, warranted expectation, that there was going to be momentum going into this from day one of Trump's tenure, but that's not happened, unfortunately. And it feels to me that we could be being strung along here. One of my old colleagues used to say, people sometimes humor you. They'll give you something, but it's of no real significant kind of like value, but it'll give you positive headlines, it'll give you press, and make you feel like you're important, but really there's no no essence in it. And so yeah, hopefully we're not being strung along on this topic, and hopefully we do get movement, and hopefully Rubio can make his voice heard. And I think it's really just kind of like taking a breath and seeing where we are at the moment. Obviously, when I'm doing articles about CIA activity and DoD activity, it's always quite a risk, and you always take a deep breath before releasing an article like that. And when you are doing that work as well, you tend to feel that your computer's acting weirdly. Your connection goes down from the internet quite frequently. So you always think, especially being like a non-US national as well, that is quite a risk doing that. And I'm just trying to not get myself into too much trouble when I'm reporting on this, and just trying to keep sane as well at the same time, because this topic does seem to drive everyone crazy. And hopefully, touch wood, I've avoided those traps.
You do fantastic work. I know it's very highly appreciated throughout the community. I, for one, certainly think it's fantastic. And I know that whenever new information does come, you'll be one of the first to publish an article on it. So again, to everyone watching or listening, please make sure that you follow Chris, you follow the Liberation Times, and you show and send him any support that you want. So, Chris, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Take care of yourself.